Hi everyone. Today we are starting Chapter 12, and Chapter 12 is all about payroll. So if you're responsible for doing the accounting for a company or the bookkeeping for a company, you're also going to be responsible for paying the employees of the company. And so that's what this whole chapter is about. Now, Chapter 12, 1 is on calculating employee earnings. I hope you took the time to go through the PowerPoint and take down all the notes regarding the different terms that are associated with paying your employees and calculating how much they are going to earn during each time period. And that's what this work together is all about today. Before we start on the work together, I just wanted to highlight the PowerPoint because at the end, the very last slide where it says calculating hourly employee total earnings is very crucial to doing the work together today. So have this open and on the side when you're working on these problems. So like I said, in MindTap today, the 12.1 work together is all about calculating our employee earnings. And this says on October 15th, time card for Alice R. Webster and time card data for other employees are provided. Calculate the regular, overtime, and total hours worked by Ms. Weber. Any hours over 8 hours per day or 40 hours per week are considered overtime. Each work week begins on Monday. Record the total hours on the time card. Round hours to the nearest quarter hour. So different companies do time cards different ways. Some have you do a manual time card. Some have you do them electronically where you clock in and clock out. At school, we have our swipe cards where we swipe in and swipe out. What they're having you do here is just round to the nearest quarter hour to record the regular hours and the overtime hours. Here they have their employees clock in and out for their lunch break. So if we round this to 8 in the morning and this to 12 when they clock out for lunch, and then round this to 1 and round this to 5, the total regular hours for the day would be 8. Same thing for the next day on Tuesday. 8 to 12 would be 4, 1 to 5 would be 4, so that would be 8. Again, 8 to 12, 1 to 5, that would be 8. Now on this day, on Thursday, it appears that they worked some overtime. So it's 8 to 12 plus 1 to 5. So that is 8 regular hours. If you work regular hours, it's typically 8 in a day. And then here you can say they did some overtime hours. Anything above 8 for this company is overtime. So 6 to 9:30 is going to be 3.5 overtime hours. The next day on Friday, they worked 1 to 5 and 6 to 10. That would still be 8. Then we have 8 to 12, 1 to 5, 8 the following Monday. 8 to 12, 1 to 6. So that would be 8 regular hours and 1 overtime hour. Again, 8 to 12, 1 to 5, so that's 8. 8 to 12, 1 to 5, that would be 8. 8 to 1 is 5, 2 to 5 is 3, so again, that's still 8. Typically, working on a Saturday would be overtime hours. Again, this is going to be dependent on your company, but Saturday hours are going to give you 3 overtime hours. And then lastly, for the day, for the week, 8 to 12, or this pay period, I should say, 8 to 12, 1 to 5 is going to be 8 hours. So then what we're going to do is we're going to add up all of the regular hours for this week. So we have how many 8-hour work days? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that would be 88 regular hours. And then this would be 3.5, 4.5, 7.5 overtime hours. Then we'll move on to the next step. The next step, they're going to have this already completed for you. So this is the last step, just in case you made a mistake on the first part, it doesn't carry over to the second part. So you have your time card for your employee, Alice Webster, and what you need to do is figure out how much you're actually going to pay her. So it says the time card data for Alice R. Webster and other employees are provided. Enter the regular and overtime hours for Miss Webster in the earnings schedule. For each employee, calculate the amount of regular overtime and total earnings. Overtime hours are paid at 1.5 times the regular rate. Round dollar amounts to the nearest cent. So we're going to need our calculator. You can use your phone calculator. I like to use my calculator app on my screen, so whatever works easier for you guys. And this is where that PowerPoint, the last slide in the PowerPoint, comes into play. So it says calculate regular earnings. So you take the regular hours times the regular rate. So if we go back to the problem, regular hours times the regular rate is going to give us the regular earnings. So we're going to take 80 times that she worked 80 regular hours for this first employee number 1, 80 regular hours at $9 an hour. So times 9 gives us 720. So employee number 1 made $720 in regular earnings, but they worked 5 overtime hours. Again, if you look at the PowerPoint, number 2, it says how to calculate the overtime rate. So you would just take the regular rate and multiply it by 1.5. And that's going to give you the overtime rate. And overtime for most companies typically is time and a half, your regular rate times 1.5. And then to get the overtime earnings, you take the overtime hours times the overtime rate. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this now. So we're first going to start off by figuring out the overtime rate. So it's just this employee number 1 makes $9 an hour. So you multiply that by 1.5. That gives you the overtime rate. So employee number 1 makes $13.50 for every overtime hour worked. So 13.5 times 5 overtime hours gives us $67.50. And then what we're going to do is add the regular earnings plus the overtime earnings to give us the total earnings. So $67.50 plus $720 equals $787.50. So $787.50. Our next step is to move on to employee number 2. So employee number 2 also worked 80 regular hours, but this employee makes $12.50 an hour. So to figure out how much regular earnings that employee made, we just take 80, our regular hours worked, multiply it by a regular rate times $12.50, and that's going to give us 1,000. So we have 1,000. And then we have to figure out the overtime earnings. So to do that, it's 2 steps. Again, we're just taking $12.50 and we're multiplying that by 1.5. That's the overtime rate of $18.75. We multiply that by the overtime hours, so times 3, $56.25. And then we just add the regular earnings and the overtime earnings to get the total earnings. So that would be $1,056.25. Our next employee, employee number 3, worked 70 hours at $9.75. So we're going to take 70, multiply it by $9.75, and that gives us $682.50. So $682.50. And then to figure out overtime, this employee didn't do any overtime hours, so we just put 0. And then copy over the regular earnings, so $682.50. And then last we have employee number 4, and employee number 4 is Alice, who we just did the time card for. So they want us to fill in the regular hours and the overtime hours. So the regular hours was 88 and the overtime was 750. So I'll slide this down so you guys can see this better. This is 88 and this is 7.5 or 7.5. Okay, so our employee Alice worked 88 hours at $11 an hour. So times 11 gives us $968. So $968. Then for overtime, we have to figure out the overtime rate first. So 11 times 1.5 makes $16.50 an hour overtime. And we're going to multiply that by the overtime hours, which is 750. So it gives us $123.75. $123.75. We're going to add those two together. So $123.75 plus $968. And that gives us $1,091.75. So now we have left the total earnings for each one of our employees for that pay period.